Uncle Charles was always the quiet, mysterious figure in our family. Unlike other uncles who cracked jokes or played games with us, he preferred solitude. When he visited, he'd head straight to the guest room, shut the door, and stay there for hours. At dinner, he sat at the far end of the table, eating in silence while everyone else talked. It wasn't that he was rude, just distant, like a locked book no one could read. I was always curious about him. Why was he like this? What was he hiding? My mom once told me, Charles has always been that way, even as a kid, but that didn't satisfy me. People aren't born like that. Something had to have happened. I'd watch him from across the room, wondering what he was thinking. Was he remembering something painful? Was he worried about something? Whatever it was, he never told anyone. One summer, he came to stay with us for a few days. It was warm and peaceful. My little brother was playing with his toy cars, my mom was cooking, and everything felt calm. When Uncle Charles arrived, he hugged my mom, nodded at my dad, gave me a brief glance, and walked straight to the guest room. The days passed as usual. Uncle Charles stayed quiet, kept to himself, and barely joined in any family activities. But something about his visit felt different this time. I couldn't explain it, but it felt like something was weighing on him. On the third day, it happened. Dinner was ready, and everyone gathered at the table, everyone except Uncle Charles. My mom frowned, knocked on his door, and got no answer. "He's probably resting," she said with a shrug. He had a long trip. But something didn't feel right. Uncle Charles never missed a meal. Later that night, as the house settled into its quiet rhythm, I found myself standing outside his door. I don't know why I was there. Maybe I just wanted to check on him. My heart started racing. The door was open just a crack. I leaned forward, holding my breath, and peeked inside. Uncle Charles was sitting on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands, shoulders shaking. I squinted, confused. Was he coughing? No, he was crying. Uncle Charles, the man who never showed any emotion, was crying. I didn't know what to do. My heart was pounding so loudly I thought he'd hear it. I took a step back, but the floor creaked beneath me. His head shot up like he'd been jolted by electricity. His eyes locked onto mine. They were red. His face was still damp with tears. We both froze. "Don't tell anyone," he muttered, his voice hoarse, wiping his face roughly with his hands. "I won't," I said quickly. I thought about leaving, but something about the way he looked, tired, broken, vulnerable, made me stay. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. The latch clicking felt louder than it should have. "Are you okay?" I asked. He let out a deep breath and rubbed his face again. "No," he admitted, "not really." I sat on the chair near the window, unsure of what to do. The air felt heavy, and for a while, neither of us spoke. I watched him run his fingers through his hair, his eyes fixed on the floor. "I get tired sometimes," he said quietly. "Tired of pretending everything's fine." His words hit me harder than I expected. I'd never heard Uncle Charles talk like this. I wasn't sure what to say, so I stayed quiet and listened. "Why don't you talk to someone?" I asked eventually. "Like Mom." She'd listen. He gave a short, bitter laugh. "It's not that simple," he muttered, shaking his head. "Sometimes it feels like no one would understand. And even if they did, you don't want to burden them." I knew that feeling. I'd felt it before, too, like you're stuck in your own head, thinking no one can understand. But I never thought Uncle Charles felt like that. He always seemed so strong. That night, he opened up in a way I never thought he would. He talked about his depression, how he'd been dealing with it for years, how every day felt like carrying something too heavy for too long. He said he didn't talk about it because he didn't want people to see him as weak. I didn't know what to say, so I just listened. For the first time, I realized that Uncle Charles wasn't the distant, untouchable man I thought he was. He was human, just like me. "I'm sorry you had to see me like this," he said after a while, still focused on the floor. "I'm not," I replied. "I'm glad I did." He glanced at me, his face filled with something I couldn't name, surprise, maybe, or gratitude. But he didn't say anything, he just nodded. The next morning, everything seemed normal again. Uncle Charles sat on the porch with his tea, staring into the distance like he always did. But I knew something had changed. I started to see him differently. He wasn't mysterious anymore. He was human. He wasn't a puzzle that needed solving. He was just someone carrying too much on his own. After that, I'd check on him more often. I'd sit next to him on the porch, not saying much, just being there. We didn't have to talk. We didn't have to do anything. I think he appreciated it, though he never said it out loud. I realized something that summer. People like Uncle Charles aren't broken. They're just tired. Sometimes all they need is for someone to notice. That day, I stopped trying to figure him out. I stopped seeing him as a mystery and started seeing him as a person. I realized that sometimes the people who seem the strongest are the ones who need help the most. And that changed everything.